We have to address this. I had other videos to do, but we've got to carry it on because it's the story of the weekend. There's a bit of a bad narrative floating around that Sean Strickland didn't beat Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya beat himself. He didn't show up that night. He looked flat-footed. He was slow. He looked off. I wanted to talk about it at the end of yesterday's video, but it would have ended up being like a 35 minute video, so I wanted to give this its own spotlight. The biased opinions that the UFC and the employees have is just completely ridiculous. It's not even the MMA fans. It seems like unanimously, especially when we're looking at the comments on yesterday's video and other MMA channel videos. We're not an MMA channel, by the way. I just like talking about what I like talking about. But it seems like the majority of the comments are made up for Sean, and I've give Sean credit. Everyone has owned up and said that they didn't expect Sean Strickland to win, but he's now won, and everyone understands that he beat Izzy fair and square. It was pretty decisively, but it seems like the media, the UFC as a whole, but most of all, Dana White, are in denial that Israel Adesanya lost. Not once did I hear any words of praise and credit towards Sean Strickland come out of Dana White's mouth. I think it was very clear that Dana White did not want Sean Strickland winning the belt, and we'll dive into a few other little bits of evidence. But first, let me just break down a couple questions on this press conference. So the post-fight presser starts off pretty sound. There's no problems. Dana White actually seems like he's in a pretty good mood. He's smiling. He talks about how crazy the sport is. Let's take a listen to what he's got to say.
How fucking crazy is this game? How crazy is this game?
It's one of those ones where you just sit here for like the next week going, what the fuck happened there, you know?
23 years when I'm looking at the internet and reading all the bullshit and all these people that think they know about fighting, and I'm not fucking sitting here acting like this is what I thought was going to happen here tonight. But what do I always say? Never judge a fight until it happens.
So nothing really wrong with that. It seems like he's in good spirits. He doesn't really show any particular favour to one fighter or the other. He did mention that he didn't think it was going to go this way himself, but he didn't seem mad about it. He did give Strickland a performance bonus as well, so there's no sort of bias happening here. Until the journalist of the Mac Life, Oscar, comes out with this question and almost plants the seed for Dana White to give Israel Adesanya all the excuses in the world. Check it out. Listen to this question.
We'll start with Israel, right? What did you think of his performance? I think some people are saying he looked very flat early on. He looked like he sort of didn't deal with the pressure Sean was giving him very well. What did you think?
No, Israel did not look flat. I thought Israel looked quite good initially, but Sean was too good.
Of Israel.
Israel looked like he was in slow motion. He looked like he couldn't get off. He looked like he was really stiff tonight.
Where did you see that, Dana? I didn't see that at all. Israel looked stiff. He looked like he couldn't get off. Izzy was throwing a lot of shots. As I said in yesterday's video, Sean just defended them all.
He looked very slow.
What? He looked very slow? Were you watching the same fight? Go back and watch Izzy fight. He did not look slow. But Oscar, the reporter, he's meant to be an unbiased journalist, to just come out and give Dana White this layup, if you like, to give Izzy all the excuses under the sun.
Do you think that could be, you know, we always talk about his activity, but maybe there's something to be said that he might be overtrained at this point and maybe needs some time off? Or do you think it's just, hey, sometimes you have a bad night?
Izzy did not have a bad night. Sean just had a really good performance. Did maybe he underestimate Sean a little bit? Yeah, I think potentially so. Now, granted, Izzy does fight quite frequently. He fights like 3-4 times a year, but that's never been an issue for him.
Only Israel knows what's going on. I'm very curious to see what he says at this press conference tonight.
Well, he didn't say anything, did he? Because he came, done 3 sentences, then got off, and his coach filled in for him. Then he got on Twitter, didn't he? And done his little Twitter fingers and said his inspirational quotes. He got off. He's got nothing to say, because I just think Izzy knows that he was outclassed. The better man was Sean Strickland on that night. Izzy's got no excuses. What's he really got to say? And I think that's maybe the problem. Izzy knows that he had a good camp. He thought he was going to steamroll Sean, as the whole world did.
There are a million things that could go wrong. Some days you wake up and it's just not there, man. You just don't, it's not there.
Think about Izzy's performance. What's he on about? There was moments in the fight I was saying, Izzy's got so many more weapons than Sean. This is very early on in the fight, granted, before Sean started really overtaking the rounds. Izzy was throwing like low kicks, he was throwing knees, he's throwing elbows, he's throwing 1-2s, hook. He was mixing it up really, really good. It's just that he was constantly on the back foot, always on the cage, and Sean just didn't relieve on that pressure.
Looked bone dry when he came out tonight, standing up really tall.
Saying that Izzy looked bone dry, meaning he didn't warm up. So sometimes when fighters don't warm up properly and they're not coming out with a little bit of a sweat on, that can be an indication that they're not getting into the groove backstage, but that's just clutching at straws. It's not really anything substantial to look into.
Standing up really tall.
He says standing up really tall. He stands up tall so he can lean back from his shots. It's just that usually he does it in the centre of the cage. He couldn't stand up tall properly this time because his ass was against the cage the entire time. He had nowhere to lean back away from the shots. If he leaned back, his head would be hitting the cage.
Even in the 5th round, when everybody knew he needed a knockout to win the fight, there was no sense of urgency to try to finish the fight. So I don't know if he's hurt.
I don't know if he's hurt, don't know if he's this, don't know if he's that. Insert a full plethora of excuses. If you've ever fought when you're constantly backing up, you realise that you can't throw shots how you usually would. Even when we were watching the fight, I think it was at the end of the 2nd round or 3rd round, Sean Strickland's coach said, you're letting Izzy snake charm you. And that's almost what Izzy banks on, is that he kind of mesmerises you with his movement and all his different setups and all his different strikes. So you end up just kind of playing into his game. If you've ever fought someone, even just in sparring, who's like that, who's got a vast arsenal of weapons and tools to throw at you, sometimes you just end up standing there frozen, not knowing what to do because you don't know what's coming at you. So you're just kind of letting them get off their game and you're not doing anything yourself. That's what Israel kind of banks on, is that his opponents can't really get going or get any momentum. Is he so used to just picking you off at a distance using a 6'4" frame, whereas Sean just walked at him, and that was simple. It was an absolute genius game plan when you think about it. And this is another thing, most people who lose against Izzy blitz in. Think of Robert Whittaker. He's got a little bit more of a karate blitzing type style. Got knocked out. Paulo Costa blitzes in, gets knocked out. Whereas Sean Strickland just walked into range, but because he's got really good striking defense, he could block everything and evade everything as he walked in. So he wasn't getting clipped with any counters that Izzy was throwing because he wasn't blitzing in. So can we please just get a little bit of credit to Sean Strickland here? From the UFC, Dana White, the MMA community is absolutely made up. The Sean Strickland's one. I remember seeing Sean Strickland on Instagram. It was like after his 4th or 5th Instagram ban, because he always gets banned for saying mad shit, and he was on like 16,000 followers. I looked before and it's on something like 540,000. It's amazing. I'm glad to see the guy doing well, because you can just tell he's a regular down-to-earth fella, and I think that's the problem, is there's no marketability. But I think personally that if Sean leaned into the marketability a little bit, he could really be a good pay-per-view draw. The guy went over to Australia, he's from America, and he was getting more cheers than Israel Adesanya, who is pretty much from there.
Then go to Sean Strickland. You know, he did what he's had to do, right? He came here, 100%. He beat the champion, 4 rounds to 1.
Came into hostile territory, the whole world talking shit about him, the whole world saying he couldn't do it, a 7-1 underdog, came in, almost finished him in the 1st round, and won the championship, won the world title, man. So,
well, there we go. It's good to hear Dana giving him a bit of praise. Then again, it was quite neutral, wasn't it? Was that praise, or was that just him describing what happened? It sounded like just a narration on the night's events, and that's pretty much what this entire press conference went like. Now, for any of the trolls in the comments who were like, "Hey, but you don't fight. Bradley Martin would ragdoll you. What do you know?" Okay, fair enough. Let's listen to what Robert Whittaker has got to say about the fight. Bobby Knuckles, what you got to say, kid?
Okay, let me say, I didn't think Izzy was going to run straight through Sean. Okay, I did not think that. So my breakdown for that fight was that Sean needed to put pressure on Izzy, get him moving back, get his back up against the fence, stay in threat range, in that threat space where he can hit Izzy, but Izzy can't use his legs without taking too much damage. And the question of the day was always, how much damage is he going to take trying to get into that space?
Yeah.
And mate, the answer is not much.
Didn't take long, did it? It didn't take long.
Strickland had an answer for every one of Izzy's techniques. For every one of Izzy's strengths, Strickland had an answer.
There you go, Dana. Listen to that. Izzy was fine. Strickland just had an answer for everything that Izzy threw at him.
Cutting off the cage perfectly. He was in that threat space where Izzy's leg kicks were taken out of concern.
Yeah.
But he could hit Izzy and Izzy could hit him. But Strickland, his defensive game was on point.
Yeah.
With Izzy throwing those looping shots as what does he do? Like kind of rope-a-dopes on the fence there. Strickland was patient, just always keeping Izzy on the back foot, which was just taking out of his gas. And mate, he just kept it consistent from the start, the very first second of the fight to the 25th. It was honestly a great performance from Strickland. And
it was, and also a quick little note on that. I've also heard a few people say, "Oh, the fight was boring." I don't think it was. When you think a fight's boring, try and go back and watch it and remove your expectation for it to be fireworks and for it to be like TKOs and knockouts. Go into that fight watching it again, remembering that Izzy has got 13 wins in the UFC and 8 of them are decisions. When you are armed with that knowledge and that information, you can go in thinking, okay, Izzy is more of a point fighter than he is a KO artist. Let's look at some of his recent fights. He got knocked out against Pierre, his fight against Jared Cannonier, his second fight against Whittaker, his fight against Vettori, his fight against Jan Blachowicz. All decisions. So when you watch the fight again, knowing that, and also knowing that Sean Strickland has had a few decisions recently, you can go in with a little bit lower expectations. And I think that's what saved me. If you go back and watch my videos from last week, you'll see that I said, I don't think the fight is going to be that eventful. So I went in with lower expectations. It's like when you go to watch a film and the trailer is sick and you're like, oh, this film's going to be so good. And then you watch it and you let down a little bit. But even if the film is still good, because your expectations were so high, you let down. Next, we've got Rob talking about people who said that Izzy looks off. Let's listen to what he says.
I see a lot of things popping up saying that Izzy looked off.
Yeah.
I don't think he had an off night. I think he looked off because Sean shut him down. Yeah. Izzy wasn't given any space in the open floor to do any of his tricky kicks. He wasn't given any space to work any of his flinch games with his punches. He wasn't given the chance. Sean was in his face from the first bell ring.
Yeah, that's so right. And someone else who tried this strategy was Marvin Vettori. But Marvin Vettori doesn't have the strike and defense or the actual boxing ability that Sean Strickland does. But now it'll be interesting to see if anyone else employs that strategy. We now know with Izzy, you've either got to starch him clean out or you've got to take the Sean Strickland approach and just walk him down and just completely close that distance. Also, more evidence that the UFC did not want this fight to happen. Okay, check out this interview. Listen to what the journalist asks Israel Adesanya.
I guess just following on from the first question Rav asked about the Strickland fight coming together, like how much convincing did the UFC take to, I guess, put that one on for you?
A lot. Like I said, he's an idiot.
So the UFC took a lot of convincing. In Israel Adesanya's words, a lot of convincing.
And, you know, the UFC don't want him embarrassing the company. But yeah, that's all I'll say about that. So you should thank me. You should really thank me for actually making him get the fight. I pushed for it. He knows what happened behind the scenes, and I pushed for it, and I'm glad the UFC trusted me to listen to me.
Well, it's kind of backfired now, hasn't it? The UFC did not want to make this fight happen. Israel just confirmed it there. I think they probably would have just rather waited for Dricus du Plessis, but Israel wanted the Sean Strickland fight. I think the reason why the UFC took so much convincing is because, as Izzy said, they were worried with the stuff that Sean Strickland says, the way he's so off the cuff and so unhinged that he would embarrass the company. At the end of the day, you have to be a company man. You have to be marketable. And Izzy is that. Whatever you think about his fighting style, we know that he's going to do the press conferences, he's going to carry himself in a certain way. Okay, he has his moments, he's a little bit cringy sometimes, he likes to drop the N-bomb to his fellow African brother. The question remains for the UFC, is Sean marketable enough? I think he is, just to a completely different audience. Sean could bring in a whole different audience of fellas who like to drink beer with big fat beer bellies, who are either taxi drivers or construction workers, because he's a little bit more down to earth, a bit more gritty. I think everyone in the world, except for Alex Pereira, predicted that Sean Strickland was going to lose. Alex trained and sparred with Sean Strickland a few months ago, and he actually predicted that Sean Strickland was going to win. Here's Alex's reaction to Sean becoming champion. I was so sure he was going to win. So many people are saying Sean Strickland trained with Pierre and that's why Sean Strickland won. But no, he won on his own merit. It's totally his success because he's such a dedicated guy with a unique style. And he really showed what he's got in his fight with Adesanya. So the credit is all his. We didn't train a lot. We had some good talks that might have made a difference. Not just for his career, but my career too. Now, Alex also addresses this whole narrative that Adesanya wasn't at his best. Let's do it. Sean came in and shut his game down. He was really smart. He was moving forward all the time with an amazing defense. Exactly what Whittaker said. Precise strikes. Landed the best attacks. And well, you saw the result. Want to congratulate Sean. Love watching Alex fight. He's one of my favourite fighters. But there you go. We said exactly the same as Robert Whittaker. So you don't even have to listen to me. You don't have to listen to MMA Guru. You don't have to listen to The Weasel or Dan Hardy. You can listen to the fighters themselves. This was not a fluke. The Sean Strickland won. He came in and shut down the entire game of Adesanya. No ifs, ands, or buts. That narrative needs to be put to bed. The MMA community are pretty much unanimous on this. It's just for some reason, the UFC, the employees, Dana White, the media, they're all delusional, and I guess it's because they want to keep the job. What do you guys think of this narrative? I think I know what you're all going to say, but does anyone disagree? Did anyone watch that fight and actually think, wow, Adesanya isn't his usual self? Or was the majority of people thinking, no, Sean Strickland is just shutting him down? Comment below. I'm going to read all the comments. I'm intrigued into everyone's thoughts. Okay, like the video. Appreciate you all. See you tomorrow.